My father stood up in front of 300 people and called me his greatest blessing. He said it with a straight face. He had a good suit on and a glass of sweet tea in his hand, and 20 years of community trust at his back. What he did not know was that the woman he spent 30 years erasing was parked out front in a gray sedan, and the certified copies I'd made were already in the room. He gave that speech and thought he was closing a chapter. He was opening the last one.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I am a nurse. I have been one for 7 years. I work nights at Grady Regional, which means I know what it looks like when something is wrong before anyone has said it out loud. A heart monitor that dips a half beat slower than it should. A set of labs that comes back within normal range, but just barely. You develop a feel for the thing that does not quite add up. The night it started for me, I was pulling records for a patient in room 14. Routine. I was 12 hours in, the kind of tired where your hands know what to do, even when your brain has already given up. I pulled the file, cross-checked the intake form, glanced at the blood type listed at the top of the page. B positive. I wrote it down on my clipboard, then I stopped. I do not know why that night was different from any other night. I had seen B positive 1,000 times. But something made me put my pen down and just stand there in the hallway under the fluorescent lights with the elevator humming at the far end and somebody's monitor beeping behind a closed door. I am B positive. My mother is O negative. She told me that years ago during a conversation about donating blood, said it like it was something to be proud of. Universal donor, she said. She carried it around like a little badge. My father is a positive. I know because I saw his Red Cross card in his wallet once when I was maybe 12. He did not notice me looking. I stood in that hallway and ran the blood type genetics I had learned in my first semester of nursing school. 2 parents with type A and type O blood cannot produce a type B child. The allele is not there. It is not a gray area. It is not a maybe. It is a biological wall. I finished my shift. I drove home. I made coffee. I did not drink. I sat at my kitchen table until the sun came up. Then I went to bed and told myself I was just tired. I was not just tired. Let me tell you what my life looked like at that point, because it matters. I was 30 years old. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of a mid-sized city in Georgia, the kind of city that still has a downtown with actual shops in it and a church on every other corner. I drove a silver Civic with a dent in the passenger side door I kept meaning to get fixed. I worked nights and slept odd hours and ate takeout more than I should have. Every Sunday I went to my parents' house on Caldwell Street for dinner. That was not optional. My mother Loretta made a full plate every time. Whatever she had been stress cooking that week, pot roast or baked chicken or her okra stew that you could smell from the driveway. My father Reginald sat at the head of the table and said, "Grace." He said it the same way every time, measured and deliberate, like a man performing for a room even when the only audience was us. Reginald Booker was a deacon. More than that, he was the elder deacon at 2nd Calvary Baptist, which in our community meant something. It meant people asked his opinion. It meant younger men straightened up when he walked in. It meant the pastor quoted him from the pulpit. He had built that standing over 20 years of showing up, of being steady, of being the kind of man people trusted with their decisions. Loretta was the women's ministry, full stop. 3 years running as ministry coordinator, the one who organized the hospital visits and the meal trains and the scholarship fund. When something happened in somebody's family, Loretta's number was the first one they called. And I was their miracle child, their only one. They could not have others, Loretta had told me once gently when I was maybe 9. She teared up when she said it. I did not ask again. Here is the thing about growing up in a house where questions make your mother cry. You stop asking questions. I spent my whole childhood standing in front of the family portrait above the mantel in the front hallway. My father, tall, dark-skinned, broad-shouldered with that deliberate stillness he always had. My mother, lighter, soft around the eyes, with hair she pressed every Friday night without fail. And then me. Same complexion as Reginald, roughly. But my jaw, my nose, the way my hair grew in tight spirals, even when I tried to smooth it flat. I used to stand there and feel the shape of a question I could not quite form. Then Loretta would come around the corner and see me looking, and her chin would start to tremble, and I would feel like a monster for even being curious. I learned to walk past that portrait without stopping. That was the life I was living. 8 days after the night in the hospital hallway, my phone rang at 6 a.m. I was asleep. I had just come off a double. I silenced it without opening my eyes. An hour later, a voicemail notification. Unknown number, area code I did not recognize. I sat up, still half asleep, hit play. A woman's voice. Calm, older, like someone who had rehearsed what she was going to say, but was still nervous saying it. My name is Deidre Weston. I'm a private investigator calling on behalf of a client. This isn't a scam. I have documentation relating to your birth family. I've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. Please call me back. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I lay there and stared at the ceiling and told myself I was still too tired to think straight. Then I deleted the voicemail. I got up, made coffee. Drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching a man across the street walk a dog that was pulling him toward every bush on the block. Ordinary Tuesday. Everything ordinary. The coffee went cold while I held it. Here's the thing about working in a hospital. You develop a particular relationship with the information you are not supposed to know yet. You see it in families all the time. The test results that have already come back, but nobody has walked in to tell the patient yet. The thing the doctor knows that the family is about to find out. There is a window where the truth exists, but has not yet entered the room. I had been living in that window for 30 years without knowing it. I dumped the coffee in the sink and called the number back. She did not answer. I left a voicemail. 1 sentence. This is Imani Booker. You called me. I almost did not mention it. I was going to let it sit. I was going to see if Deidre called back, gather more information, figure out what I was actually dealing with before I said anything to anyone. That was the sensible plan. But Sunday dinner has a way of loosening things I mean to keep tight. We were halfway through the meal. Loretta's baked chicken, the kind where the skin gets that dark caramel color and the whole kitchen smells like garlic and rosemary for the rest of the day. Reginald was talking about the church anniversary coming up in 3 weeks. 300 people, a catered dinner, a slideshow. He had been on the planning committee for months. Something weird happened, I said. I was passing the roles when I said it. Casual as I could make it. Got a call from a private investigator, said she had information about my birth family. Reginald's fork stopped moving. Not in a startled way, not the way a person freezes when they hear something unexpected. He stopped the way a person stops when they are deciding what to do next. When he hugged 7 a.m, thin winter light, a few nurses coming off shift, a maintenance truck idling near the side entrance. Nobody watching me. Inside was a single document, a partial birth certificate, the top half of it photocopied. Date of birth, my birthday. Hospital, Grady County General, county mine. The line for the mother's name was blacked out with marker, thick, deliberate strokes, like someone who did not want me to see it yet but wanted me to know there was something to see. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note, 6 lines. I know this is a shock. I have been trying to reach you for a long time. The person who hired me is not trying to disrupt your life. She just wants you to know the truth. If you want to see the full document, I can show you when we meet. I will not push. This is your decision. No signature, just DW. I stood next to my car in the hospital parking lot with the paper in my hand and felt something I'd been sitting on for a week finally crack open. I texted Deidre the address of a diner 3 blocks away and told her I could be there in 15 minutes. She was already there when I walked in. Corner booth, laptop open, coffee she had not touched. mid-40s, natural hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked like someone who had done this many times and had learned how to do it without making it worse. She stood up when she saw me, nodded at the seat across from her. I sat down without taking off my coat. "Tell me what you know," I said. She opened a folder. Inside, organized in neat sections, documents, photographs, printed records. "The woman who hired me," she said, "is named Claudette Sims. She is 51 years old. She lives in Atlanta and works as a patient care coordinator at Emory University Hospital. When Claudette became pregnant, she was told that if she did not sign a voluntary relinquishment form before she left the hospital after delivery, her placement would be terminated. Without the placement, she could not finish her degree. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no family nearby. She signed. She was 20 years old, and she signed a form in a hospital room, and a man walked out with her daughter, and she spent the next 3 decades trying to find her way back. I looked at the photograph on the table. I did not touch my coffee. I said, "How much of this can you prove?" Deidre said, "Enough." I drove home from that diner at 30 miles an hour on a 50-mile-an-hour road. Nobody honked at me. Or maybe they did, and I just did not hear it. I parked in my apartment lot and sat in the car with the engine off. The heat was already bleeding out of the vents. The neighborhood was just waking up. Somebody pulling trash cans to the curb, a woman walking a kid to the bus stop, the ordinary machinery of a morning that had no idea what I was sitting with. I went through the blood types again out loud like I was explaining it to a student. Reginald, A positive. Loretta, O negative. Me, B positive. A parent with blood type A carries either 2 A alleles or 1 A and 1 O. A parent with blood type O carries 2 O alleles. The only blood types their children can have are A or O, not B, never B. I had known this since my first year of nursing school. I had explained it to patients, explained it to nursing students I had trained. It was not complicated. It was biology. It was a wall. Loretta, I caught myself. Loretta was not my biological mother. Reginald was still my biological father. Deidre had said that, and the birth certificate she showed me had listed him by name, which meant he had not just taken in someone else's child. He had taken his own child from the woman he had pressured into giving her up, brought that child home to his wife, and built 30 years of silence around it. I sat in that car until the cold got into my bones. Then I went upstairs and pulled every piece of childhood medical paperwork I still had. Doctor's notes, immunization records, a growth chart from when I was 8, blood type B positive on every page. I sat on my kitchen floor with the papers spread around me. The refrigerator hummed. Somebody in the apartment above me was walking around in shoes they should have taken off at the door. I thought about my mother Loretta and the way she had cried every single time I had gotten close to a question she did not want to answer. I did not call her. I sat on that floor for a long time. Then I called Deidre. I want to be honest about something. Part of me wanted to be wrong. I know that sounds strange after everything I just told you. But I had 30 years of Sunday dinners and a mother who sat in the front row at my nursing school graduation and cried so hard she had to be handed tissues by the woman next to her. I had a father who drove me to every school event, who fixed my car without being asked, who showed up. Whatever they had done, they had also shown up. I wanted to be wrong. So before I moved another inch forward, I called Loretta, not to confront her. I was not ready for that. I just needed one more data point. She answered on the first ring like she always did. "Hey, baby," she said. Her voice was warm. Sunday dinner warm. I said, "Hey, Mama, I just had a question." She said, "What is it?" I said, "You remember when I was in nursing school and we talked about blood types? You told me yours." "Yeah," she said slowly. I said, "What is mine?" Silence. Not a long silence. Maybe 4 seconds. But I have worked in emergency medicine long enough to know what a person sounds like when they are buying time versus when they are actually thinking. That was buying time. "Why would you ask me that?" she said. I said, "I am just trying to remember. I cannot find my paperwork." Silence again. "Baby," she said, "you doing okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Never mind, I'll find it." I hung up. I sat with my phone in my hand. If Loretta had said be positive without hesitating, I would have had a problem. I would have had to consider that maybe the genetics worked some other way. Maybe I had made an error. Maybe there was something I did not know. But Loretta did not say be positive. Loretta did not say anything, and that 4-second silence was the last piece I needed. 3 days later, Deidre called me. Her voice was different, flatter. The kind of flat that means someone is managing their own reaction before they pass the news along. She said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to stay with me." I said, "Tell me." She said, "The original birth certificate from 1996, the one I showed you a photocopy of. I filed a request for the certified copy from the County Vital Records Office this morning, and the clerk came back with a different record." I said, "What do you mean a different record?" She said, "There is an amended birth certificate on file, filed in 2001. It lists Loretta Booker as the birth mother. It lists no father, and there is a notation on it that says the original was corrected for clerical error." I said nothing. She said, "Reginald filed it. I found his signature on the amendment request. He used an attorney, someone who is no longer practicing. The amendment was approved without challenge because nobody was there to challenge it. Claudette did not have a lawyer in 2001. She did not even know the amendment had been filed until years later." I said, "So the only copy we have is the photocopy you showed me." She said, "Which is not a certified copy, which means I cannot walk into a courtroom or a records office or anywhere official and use it as primary evidence without the original to back it up." I said, "Can we get the original?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I have been making calls. The county digitized their records in 2004, but anything filed before 2000, original certificates, the physical records, those were kept on microfiche before digitization. If the original was not destroyed and was not overwritten, it should still exist on film at the State Vital Records Archive. But I cannot access State Archive microfiche without a formal request, and a formal request from me tips off anyone watching the file." I said, "So we are stuck." She said, "I am stuck. You, on the other hand, can request your own birth records as the subject of those records. You have legal standing I do not have." I sat with that. I said, "How long does it take?" She said, "If you file this week, probably 8 to 12 business days for the archivist to pull the reel and confirm what is on it." I looked at the calendar on my phone. The church anniversary dinner was in 15 days. I said, "I will file tomorrow morning." I need to tell you about Shayla. Shayla DeMarco and I had been working the same floor at Grady Regional for 4 years. We had eaten probably 300 hospital cafeteria lunches together. We had covered each other's shifts, complained about the same administrators, talked each other through the kind of days that make you question whether you are strong enough for this job. She was the kind of person who noticed when something was wrong without making a whole announcement about it. 2 days after the phone call with Deidre, I was at the nurse's station doing charting, and Shayla pulled up a chair next to me and said, "You want to tell me what is going on with you?" I said, "Nothing." She said, "Imani." I looked at her, and I told her. The short version. Not everything, but enough. The blood types, the investigator, the amended birth certificate, the woman in Atlanta who had been trying to find me for 28 years. Shayla was quiet for a while. She had her arms crossed, which meant she was thinking hard and not ready to talk yet. Then she said, "My cousin Brunetta went through something close to this." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Her father paid a clerk at the county office to swap a record, changed the name on an inheritance document. By the time her family figured it out, the digital version showed the amended record, and that was all anyone could pull. Her lawyer said they were done." I said, "What happened?" She said, The lawyer did not know about the state archive. The county digitized in 2003 or 4, something like that. But they did not destroy the original microfiche reels. They are stored at the State Vital Records Office in the basement, literally on film. You request them by the year and county, and the archivist pulls the reel, and you view it in person on a reader machine. She looked at me. She said, "Brunetta found the original document on that reel, photographed every frame. It was exactly what they needed." I said, "Does your cousin's attorney still practice?" She said, "She does. I will send you her number tonight." I looked at Shayla for a moment. I said, "You did not have to tell me that." She said, "Yes, I did. Now go file your records request." 9 days later, I drove to the state capitol. I had submitted the request the morning after I talked to Shayla. I had used Brunetta's attorney, a woman named Claire Dawson, who filed the formal request on my behalf with a cover letter explaining exactly what I was looking for and why I had standing. Claire had done this before. She knew which office to call, which form to use, which archivist to ask for. The request went in on a Tuesday. The confirmation came back the following Thursday. The archive was in the basement of a state office building that smelled like old carpet and recycled air. A woman named Mrs. Tatum met me at the front desk, checked my identification, led me through 2 sets of locked doors and down a long hallway of metal shelving to a room with 4 microfilm reader machines along the wall. She pulled the reel for me. 1996 Grady County Vital Records filed October through December. I sat down at the machine and threaded the film, frame by frame. Birth certificates, one after another, names and dates scrolling past in that slightly blurry black and white way microfiche always looks, like looking at the past through fogged glass. And then, October 26th, 1996. There it was. Mother, Claudette Renee Sims, age 20, unmarried. Father, Reginald James Booker, age 32, child, female. Name to be determined, unsigned by the mother. The relinquishment notation was on a separate page 2 frames over, dated the day after delivery. Claudette's signature at the bottom, small and cramped, the signature of someone who was very young and very scared, and signing something she'd been told she did not have a choice about. I took photographs of every single frame with my phone, 43 photographs. Then I asked Mrs. Tatum for 12 certified copies. She looked at me for a second over her reading glasses and asked if I needed a moment. I said, "I am fine. 12 copies, please." I paid the fee. I drove home. I pulled into my parking lot, turned off the engine, and let myself sit there for 5 full minutes. Not crying, not celebrating. Just sitting with the weight of holding the thing I had driven 300 miles and 9 years of questions to find. Then I sent Deidre a text. 2 words. Found it. Deidre called me back within the hour. She had one more piece of news. She said it carefully, the way she said things that she knew would cost me something to hear. "Claudette wants to meet you," she said. I had been expecting that. I had thought about it on the drive home. I had thought about it a lot, actually, lying awake in the nights between the microfiche request and this moment. I said, "Not yet." Deidre waited. I said, "I know how that sounds. But if I meet her before the truth is on the table with my parents, Reginald will find a way to turn it around. He will make it about me being manipulated. He will make it about a stranger who got into my head. He is good at reframing things. He has been doing it my whole life. If I walk in there having already met Claudette, I hand him that." Deidre said, "That is a real risk." I said, "I need the reveal to happen first. I need the room to see what he did before I let them see who she is. I do not want to meet my mother for the first time while I'm still living inside his version of the story." Silence on the line. Then Deidre said, "She's been waiting 28 years. She will wait a few more days." I said, "Tell her I know. Tell her I am not avoiding her. Tell her I just want the first time to be clean." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a while. The anniversary dinner was in 6 days. I called Deidre at 11 on a Thursday night. She answered on the second ring. I said, "The church anniversary dinner is Saturday, 300 people. Every deacon, every elder, every woman's ministry member, every person who has given Reginald Booker 20 years of trust and a place of honor at every event that matters in this community." She said, "I know." I said, "I want you there." Quiet. I said, "I want the certified copies on that table. In a room where he cannot rip them up and walk away. In a room where he cannot make my mother cry and have 40 people lean toward her. He has had 30 years of private conversations. Every private conversation he controlled. The only thing he cannot control is a room full of people who are already watching." Deidre said, "You understand, this cannot be undone." I said, "I know what cannot be undone." I watched him amend a birth certificate in 2001 to erase a woman who did nothing wrong. I watched him fabricate paperwork. I watched him intercept however many years of somebody's letters without my knowledge. He decided what could not be undone for a very long time. It is my turn now. Deidre did not answer right away. Then she said, "Claudette has asked again about being there." I said, "Tell her to park in front of the church and wait for my text. I do not want her in the room when it happens. I want her to hear that it is done. Then I want to walk out to her." Deidre said, "Okay." She said it like she meant it, like she had been waiting to hear me sound exactly like that. I said, "Bring everything. Original copies, the affidavit, the employment records, the relinquishment form, all of it." She said, "I will see you Saturday." I hung up, sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. 6 days from now, Reginald Booker would stand up in front of the people who had trusted him for 20 years and give a speech about family, and I would let him finish. 2nd Calvary Baptist knew how to put on an event. The fellowship hall had been transformed. Round tables with white linens, battery candle centerpieces, ivy trailing out of glass vases. A slideshow looped at the front of the room, 40 years of congregation history, faces I had grown up seeing every Sunday rolling past on the screen. There was a buffet table against the far wall and a 3-piece jazz ensemble setting up in the corner. 300 people, and they were all there or close to it. I arrived at 7. Loretta was at the door in a copper-colored dress, greeting people, touching arms, laughing at the right moments. She lit up when she saw me. "Baby," she said and hugged me for a beat longer than usual. "You look beautiful." I said, "Thanks, Mama, so do you." Reginald was at the head table already, shaking hands with the pastor and 2 of the other senior deacons. Navy suit, gold tie. He had that room-working ease he always had at church events. Warm, unhurried, the kind of man who looked like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He nodded at me when I came in. I nodded back. I found my assigned seat near the middle of the room. Shayla was 2 tables over. She'd come. She had told me she would, without me having to ask twice. She caught my eye when I sat down and gave me a small nod. In the far corner, near the door that led to the parking lot, a woman I did not know was sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a closed laptop. Late 40s, natural hair, sensible blazer. Deidre. My bag was in my lap. Inside, a folder with 4 certified copies I had held back from the stack I had given Deidre. I wanted some in the room with me. My phone showed Deidre's number at the top of my recent calls. Outside in the parking lot, according to the text I had received 11 minutes ago, a gray sedan was parked 3 spots from the main entrance. I took a drink of water. I was steady. I want to be honest about that. I had thought I would be shaking or feel sick or need to talk myself down from something, but I felt like I did in a trauma bay. Present, focused. Like everything else had gone quiet and there was only the thing directly in front of me. Dinner was served at 7:30. The food was good. Nobody was tense yet. The slideshow kept rolling. At some point, somebody at the table behind me laughed so hard at something that people 2 tables over turned around to see what happened. Ordinary Saturday evening at a church dinner. At 8 o'clock, the pastor stood and tapped his glass. He said some words about the 40th anniversary, about what this congregation had meant to this city, about legacy and faithfulness. Then he said he wanted to give the floor to the man who had been a pillar of this church for 2 full decades. He said, "Brother Reginald." Reginald stood. He did not use notes. He never used notes. He had the kind of memory for a room that came from years of reading people and knowing what they needed to hear. He talked about service, about what it meant to commit yourself to a community and let that community hold you accountable. He talked about his father, who had been a deacon before him. He talked about Loretta, and Loretta pressed her hand to her heart at her table. Then he looked across the room at me. He said, "And my daughter, Imani, who makes me proud every single day of my life." 300 people looked at me. I held his gaze. He smiled, the kind of smile that lands perfectly in a room full of people who love you. I reached for my phone under the table, typed one word to Deidre, "Now." Deidre stood up from her corner table. She did not rush. She walked to the center of the room at the pace of someone who had done difficult things in front of large groups before and had learned that calm traveled faster than noise. She said, "Excuse me. I apologize for the interruption. My name is Deidre Weston. I am a licensed private investigator. I am here because Imani Booker asked me to be here, and I have documentation she has asked me to present on her behalf." The room took about 4 seconds to understand what was happening. Reginald was on his feet before those 4 seconds were up. He said, "This is a private event." Deidre said, "I was invited by your daughter, sir." Every head in the room turned between them. Deidre opened her folder and began placing certified copies at the tables nearest to her. The people who took them looked at them, then looked up. Some immediately passed them to the person next to them. Reginald said, "I want everyone to understand that this woman was hired to disrupt this family and this church." The pastor said quietly, "Brother Reginald, let her speak." That landed differently than anything else that had happened in the last 2 minutes, because the pastor saying that meant the pastor was not immediately on Reginald's side, and Reginald's eyes changed when he heard it. Deidre said, "The document being shared is a birth certificate, original, filed with the county in 1996. It lists the biological mother of Imani Booker. That name is not Loretta Booker. The biological father listed is Reginald Booker." Loretta, at the head table, went very still. Someone at a table near the back said, not even loudly, just said, "Lord have mercy." Reginald said, "This is fabricated. I am standing here in front of my church family, and I am telling you, this is a fabrication by a woman who was hired to destroy what we have built." I stood up. My chair did not scrape. I pushed it back slowly. I said, "Dad." The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when the person who is not supposed to speak speaks. I said, "What is my blood type?" He looked at me. I said, "You have known me for 30 years. What is my blood type?" He did not answer. I said, "I am B positive. You are A positive. Mama is O negative." I looked at Loretta. I said, "Mama, I know you know this." "I know you have always known this." Loretta's hands were flat on the table in front of her. Her face was still. Not the crying face she always had ready. Something different. Something that looked a little bit like relief and a lot like a woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and could feel it starting to leave her hands. She said, "Reginald." His name from her mouth, in that room, in that tone, was its own kind of document. The 3 nurses from my unit who were sitting together at a table near the window, I saw the exact moment they ran the genetics. They looked at each other. They looked at me. Reginald straightened his lapels. Old habit. The motion he made before board meetings and important votes. He he said. I protected this child. Everything I did to give her a stable home and a real family. Deacon Franklin, who had served beside Reginald for 15 years, said from the next table, "Reginald, who is the woman on that certificate?" Reginald said nothing. Deacon Franklin said, "Who is she?" Silence. I picked up my bag. I said, "She is parked outside, and I am going to go meet her now." I walked toward the door. I heard Reginald say behind me, "Imani." I did not stop. The night air was cold. November in Georgia, sharp and clean, the kind of cold that makes you breathe deeper without meaning to. I stood on the front steps of the church for a moment with the light spilling out behind me. The jazz ensemble had stopped playing. I could hear the sound of the room through the closed doors. Not words, just the pressure of 300 people, recalibrating everything they thought they knew. I looked out at the parking lot. The gray sedan was parked 3 spaces from the entrance. A woman stood next to it. She was my height, roughly, same build. Dark curly hair pulled back in a low bun, a few threads of gray in it. She was wearing a coat that was a little too light for the temperature, like she had not been thinking about the weather when she got dressed. She was holding something in both hands, a small white envelope. I walked toward her. She did not move. She watched me come and kept both hands on the envelope and did not say anything until I was close enough that I could see her face clearly. Then she said, "Imani," just that. My name in her mouth, and the way she said it, like she had said it 10,000 times to an empty room, and this was the first time it had gone anywhere. I said, "You are Claudette." She said, "I am." She held the envelope out. I took it. Inside was a photograph, a hospital room, fluorescent light, a bed with the railing up, a woman who was recognizably Claudette at 20 years old, pale and exhausted and luminous in the way of someone who has just done the hardest physical thing they have ever done. She was holding a newborn wrapped in a striped hospital blanket. On the back, in neat handwriting, October 27th, 1996, the day I met you. I stood there in the parking lot with the photograph in my hand and the sound of the church behind me and the cold air on my face. Claudette said, "I am not here to ask you for anything. I just need you to know that you were wanted. Every single day. I need you to know that." The front door of the church opened. Reginald came through it. He came down the steps without his suit jacket. I do not know where it went. He looked smaller without it. He stopped at the edge of the sidewalk when he saw Claudette. Behind him, the door opened again. Loretta, then the pastor, then Deacon Franklin, then several other people filtering out, not intrusively, just following the gravity of it, the way people do when they understand that something is happening that cannot be unhappened. Shayla came out and stood near the bottom of the steps. She crossed her arms and stayed there. Reginald looked at Claudette the way someone looks at a thing they have been outrunning for a very long time, and have finally turned around to find standing right behind them. He said, "You have no legal standing here. Whatever she—" He gestured at Deidre, who had followed the crowd out. "Whatever she told you, you have no claim on this family." Claudette looked at him. Not angry, not trembling. She looked at him the way I had seen veteran nurses look at a situation that was already resolved, and they were just waiting for the chart to catch up. She said, "You told me I would lose my placement if I did not sign. You had that form ready before I had been in that hospital bed for 12 hours. I was 20 years old, Reginald. I did not have a lawyer. I did not have family within 300 miles. I had a nursing degree I needed to finish so I could take care of myself. And you used every one of those things." She did not raise her voice. She said, "You want to call that protection? Go ahead, but everybody out here can hear you saying it." 300 people had not all come outside, but enough had, maybe 40. The people who had been closest to the door, the ones who had been watching from the moment Deidre stood up. Church people, deacons, ministry members, the pastor, the women who had put Loretta's name on plaques for a decade. Deacon Franklin said, "Reginald, is it true what the document says?" Reginald looked at him. He said, "I did what I had to do for my family." Deacon Franklin said, "That is not what I asked you." Silence. The pastor stepped forward. Not aggressively. He was not a confrontational man. But he stepped forward and said very quietly, "Brother Reginald, we are a church of truth. If there is truth here that needs to come out, this is the place." Reginald looked around. I had watched that man command rooms my entire life. Church halls, dinner tables, board meetings, family gatherings. I had watched people adjust their posture when he walked in. I had watched conversations change direction when he cleared his throat. His whole authority had always lived in his composure, in that practiced stillness, in the certainty that he was the person in the room who knew the most and had already decided what would happen next. He was standing in a parking lot surrounded by 40 people who now held certified copies of a document he had spent 30 years pretending did not exist. He had no next move. He straightened his collar, the smallest gesture, pure reflex. Then he walked to his car, not quickly. Reginald Booker did not do anything quickly. He walked to his car the way he had always walked out of rooms when he was finished with them, deliberate and unbothered, like the departure was his decision. He got in. He drove away. Loretta stood on the church steps and watched his taillights until they were gone. Then she looked at me. She looked at Claudette. She opened her mouth and closed it again. She said, finally, "I am sorry. To both of you. I am so sorry." It was not enough. We all knew it was not enough. But she said it in front of 40 witnesses, and she meant it. And sometimes the meaning is the beginning. Deacon Franklin put his hand on the pastor's arm and said something too quietly for me to hear. The pastor nodded. Claudette was still standing next to her car. I walked over to her. I said, "I would like to have coffee with you tomorrow morning, if you are not driving back tonight." She said, "I was not planning to drive back tonight." I said, "There is a place on 5th Street, Lena's. They open at 7. She said, "I will be there." I looked at her face in the parking lot light. The jaw, the way she held herself, the eyes that were working very hard right now not to do what they very much wanted to do. I said, "Me too." Here is what happened in the 2 weeks after. Reginald submitted his resignation from the deacon board on a Tuesday. The letter, which Deacon Franklin shared with me privately, said he was stepping back due to personal health reasons. No other explanation. His chair in the front row remained empty for the following 3 Sundays. Loretta called me on the Wednesday after the dinner. I let it ring. She called again Thursday. I let that one ring, too. She did not leave a voicemail the first time. The second time she did. She said, "I know you need space. I am not going to push. I just want you to know I am here when you are ready." I listened to the voicemail 4 times. I did not call back yet, but I did not delete it. Claire Dawson filed the petition to have my birth certificate corrected to reflect the original record. The process took 3 weeks. Reginald was notified and did not respond, did not object, did not show up, did not send an attorney. Just silence. The judge signed the order on a Thursday morning. My birth certificate was amended to match the original. Claudette Renee Sims, mother. Reginald James Booker, father. My name did not change. My birthday did not change. Only the story behind both of them had been set right. I held the corrected certificate in Claire's parking lot after the hearing. Just stood there with it. The paper was crisp and official and smelled like fresh ink. Claudette was there. She had driven up from Atlanta again. We stood next to her car and neither of us said anything for a while. Then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. I said, "Like something got put back where it belongs." She nodded like she knew exactly what that meant. Shayla brought lunch to my apartment that Friday. She showed up with a bag from the Thai place 3 blocks over and just said, "I figured you were not cooking." We sat on my living room floor and ate out of the containers, and she did not ask me too many questions, and I told her most of it anyway. At some point she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, "What?" She said, "That woman drove from Atlanta and stood in a church parking lot in a coat that was too thin for the weather because she wanted to be there if you walked out that door." I said, "I know." Shayla said, "That is somebody who did not stop." I said, "I know." We sat with that for a while. 3 months out, here is where things stand. Claudette and I have coffee every other Saturday. We go to Lena's on 5th Street. We've been there 6 times now. The first 2 times were a little careful, the way any 2 people are when they are trying to figure out what they are to each other. By the 3rd time, we had stopped being careful. By the 4th time, she was telling me about a difficult patient situation she had at work and asking for my opinion, and I was giving it, and it felt normal. Not performed. Normal. She is a good nurse. A good care coordinator, really. She moved into the administrative side about 8 years ago, which is something I can see myself doing eventually, and we have talked about that. She has opinions about hospital administration that I share entirely. Her family carries a genetic variant worth knowing about. I scheduled an appointment with a genetic counselor a week after the dinner. We have a plan. I know what to watch for. For the first time in my life, my medical history is not a blank wall. Loretta and I have started talking again. Not Sunday dinners, not yet, but phone calls. Short at first, then longer. She has not tried to explain herself in a way that asks me to forgive the timeline. She has mostly just asked how I am and listened to the answer. I think she is trying to figure out how to be honest with me for the first time in 30 years. And that is harder than it sounds when honesty has been the one thing a person spent decades avoiding. I do not know if we will get back to Sunday dinners. I do not know if that version of things can exist anymore. I think there might be a different version if she keeps showing up honestly, but I am not going to rush it to make her feel better. Reginald sent me a letter, handwritten, which surprised me. 3 paragraphs. No apology in those 3 paragraphs. Exactly, but something adjacent to it. Language about the difficulty of the decisions he made, about his belief that he was protecting me, about the door being open if I wanted to talk. I read it twice. I put it in the nightstand drawer. The door may be open. I am not walking through it today. That is allowed. Here is what I want to say before I go. If you are listening to this and there is a question in your family that nobody will answer, a question they deflect with tears or silence, or a subject change so sharp it could cut you, I need you to hear this. That question is not the problem. The silence is. I spent 30 years believing that asking about my own face, my own features, my own history was an act of disloyalty. I was raised to believe that curiosity was the same thing as ingratitude, that the price of being loved was agreeing never to look too closely at the terms of the arrangement. That is not love. That is a contract, and you did not sign it. You can love someone genuinely, deeply, imperfectly, and still demand the truth. Those 2 things are not enemies. The people who tell you otherwise are the ones with something to hide. And if someone cries every time you get close to an honest answer, I need you to understand something. Those are not feelings. Those are walls. And you have every right to walk through them. I still love Reginald. I do not know what to do with that exactly. But it is true. He raised me. He drove me to school and sat through my graduation and showed up in the ways that fathers show up. I will not erase that. But I will not let what he did to me and to Claudette be buried under the weight of my gratitude either. Gratitude is not a gag. The last thing I will tell you is this. A few weeks ago, Claudette and I were at Lena's on a Saturday morning, and it was raining outside. That gray November rain that makes the whole city look soft and far away. She had her coffee, and I had mine, and she was telling me some story about a patient, something funny, and she tilted her head a certain way in the middle of the sentence. And I thought, I do that. I do that exact thing when I am telling a story. I had never seen that in a mirror before. I looked at her face across the table and I saw my jaw, my eyes, the way my hair grows, all the things I used to stand in front of the portrait on Caldwell Street and wonder about. I belong to someone. That is the only gift I ever needed. That is my story. It is still going. I would not have it any other way.